Well, good morning, everybody. Jeff Slakey here on the Daybreak Show and via Zoom video conference representing the 6th District of our great state of Washington, Derek Kilmer. Good morning, Derek. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you too.
Got a lot of good things to talk about here as we move through coronavirus. I saw that you, in your press releases on your website, kilmer.house.gov, have introduced bipartisan legislation, and bicameral, there are some senators that are introducing this as well. Let's talk about it. Worker access to skills training programs. This could be a big thing to get folks back to work.
Yeah, and we've obviously there's been massive economic disruption caused by this coronavirus, and there's been a lot of economists, including the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who have said that one of the big threats coming out of this is the potential of skills to atrophy. We already had some challenges in that regard with people who may have been laid off prior to this pandemic needing additional skills training, additional career development, additional whether looking to get involved in an apprenticeship or some other opportunity. And so, this is something we started taking a look at to say, okay, one of the ways that we will address unemployment, not just in the near term, but over the midterm and the long term, is to ensure that high quality training is available for people to be able to upgrade their skills and transition to new work, particularly if we may see some jobs go away that may not come back. So we've introduced a bill called the Skills Renewal Act, which would create a skills training tax credit. It would be up to $4,000 per person, and it would cover dollar for dollar the cost of training programs, whether that's an apprenticeship or a certificate program through a community college or a technical college. And it would allow for the use of distance learning programs, since obviously right now a lot of learning is happening in that way. We've talked to workforce development professionals who think this is a really important step and important tool to put into the toolbox. And I think that's why you've seen this bipartisan support for it.
What are the types of skills that you're thinking about here when it comes to these? I know we've talked over the couple of years about the backlog of work that needs to be done in our national park system, or the massive amount of infrastructure that would be a great injection into the workforce. Are those the types of jobs where you would get those skills and move into those types of professions, or is it kind of the whole gambit?
Well, your comment about the trades and infrastructure, I think, is a good example. We need more people going into the skilled trades, and we may see more people transition coming out of this pandemic, looking for a career change and potentially going into an arena like that where we have a scarcity of folks working in that. But listen, even right now in the midst of this pandemic, the one employer in our area that's not just hiring, but that's hiring a bunch, is the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. And you look at the apprenticeship programs that they run, you look at some of the requirements for certification or for industry skills that they need. That's the type of thing that you could see someone take advantage of this sort of resource, develop those sorts of skills, and hopefully be able to get into a job that helps them have a family wage.
Distance learning you mentioned, and we're still having conversations with the local school districts, North Mason School District, Shelton School District, and Mason County, on ways that the future of education may face. But shifting to your profession, you in the House have recently been able to at least start looking at proxy voting for your being away from Congress. Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's something that I will end up using, but you may see some members of Congress use it. We were mentioning before we hopped on together, I was in Washington, D.C. last week. I'll be in Washington, D.C. next week to vote on legislation. But you've got some states, some communities that are on lockdown. You've got some people who are medically fragile, and being able to continue to represent their constituents is pretty important. So the House has put in place a system of proxy voting where if someone cannot make it, there's now a process through which they can designate someone to vote on their behalf. They have to lay out very explicitly, here's how I would vote if I were there. and then have someone vote in their stead. The other big thing, and this is, I think this is really important, is that the rules also established the ability for committees to meet virtually. That's been happening in recent weeks, not really in the eye of the American people, though. So, for example, in the last month, I've probably had maybe a dozen teleconferences with the Appropriations Committee. We had a call with Secretary Mnuchin about the SBA programs that rolled out in response to the coronavirus, and a pretty bumpy rollout, right? So doing that oversight right now is really important. In fact, I would argue it's more important than ever. When a whole bunch of money is being spent really quickly, you want to make sure that there's a belt and suspenders to make sure that those dollars are spent efficiently, effectively, that there's not waste involved. I got to tell you, I was super ticked when I learned that the programs that were designated to help small businesses in Mason County were getting used by large publicly financed companies, or by the Los Angeles Lakers. I think I've shared with you before, I hate the Los Angeles Lakers.
Hmm.
I always have. And I really hate them when I find out they're taking money that was designated for small businesses. And so that type of interaction with the Secretary of the Treasury is really important. Ideally, it would happen in a way that the American people could see it and hear it and understand what sort of oversight is occurring. So last week, the House passed a change in the rules to formally allow video committees to meet via video conference. This is something that other parliaments, other state legislatures have already put in place. Frankly, I think it took Congress longer than it should have. I was pushing for this 6, 8 weeks ago. But I think it's better late than never. We've actually, the committee that I chair, called the Committee on the Modernization of Congress, has actually been doing virtual meetings. They weren't official hearings because we weren't allowed to have official hearings, but we were having discussions with experts on issues that matter. Now we're able to do them, record them, and share them with C-SPAN and with the American people.
It seems that this has really shown a lot of folks that this type of communication, distance work, is available. A lot of people up until a few months ago said, "Well, we don't have the computer system for that, or we don't have." But everybody was able to figure out how to make that work. I want to talk a little bit about the reopening of Washington State. We're starting to see different counties get different phase two variances. Mason County is going to be applying for a phase two opening here shortly. How are you feeling about the state reopening, and how is Washington compared to the other states? And it seems like the plan now nationally is that every governor has their idea of how things are going to be opening up.
Yeah. Well, it's been a constant conversation with the governor. To his credit, he's been in touch with the entire congressional delegation, kind of keeping us informed and taking our questions all throughout this process. I think we're on the phone with him twice a week, and we have been since the beginning of this. Obviously, this has really stunk, right? This whole process has been tough on our local employers. It's been tough on our school kids. I've got a fifth grader and an eighth grader that, my folks were both school teachers, and I always said I don't have the patience to be a school teacher, and this last 2 months has proved it. And it's been tough on our kids. It's been tough on our teachers. It's been tough on families, and just in terms of making ends meet. And so I think everybody has a sense of impatience and a desire to see things get back and get reopened. And at the same time, people are really scared, right? People don't want to get this really awful virus. We've seen, I have friends who have gotten it, and it's really kicked the stuffing out of them. And on top of that, as much as this has really stunk to go through this over the last couple months, what would really, really stink is having to do it again, because we see a huge spike in cases. And so I think it's appropriate that the state has tried to ground all of these decisions around reopening in science and guidance from public health professionals, and trying to ensure that we're keeping folks safe and hopefully getting our economy back up and moving.
On your website, kilmer.house.gov, are ways that folks in the 6th can get in touch with you for assistance in various different ways. How have you been able to help? Do you have any stories of ways that you and your staff have been able to help constituents during this time?
Yeah, the day-to-day since this has started has been mostly finding holes in the dam, and between myself and my team, sticking fingers and toes in those holes just to try to help people. So it's been day to day in terms of helping employers that are trying to navigate. I talked to a guy a couple weeks back who said, it took me 32 years to build my business. I got a lot of families who depend on me for a paycheck, and I'm deciding right now whether or not to try to weather this storm or just fold the tent. And thankfully, you've seen a response from Congress to create some tools to help employers weather that storm. But it can be complicated to navigate that. And so part of the work we've done is to try to help local employers. And thankfully, my whole team is doing that work, and I'm doing that work too. There's a guy in my neighborhood. I was walking my dog the other night who said, Evan from your team um, saved my business. And he said, I was really struggling to figure out how to be eligible for this stuff. And I just sat down with your teammate, and I really owe you one. And, that feels good to know that we're helping people and helping their employees, because that's, uh, my background was working in economic development. I really feel like the small businesses in our region are the backbone of our economy. I think the last time I saw you in person was at the North Mason Chamber event, and just celebrating some of the cool employers we have in our region. And we got to make sure we hold on to them and give them the support that they need. I'll give you some other examples though as well. So half of my team here in the district is caseworkers, where if someone has an issue with any federal agency, we work on their behalf. I just talked a week or so ago with the family that my casework team had helped. We got a call from a dad saying, my son is stuck in Peru and can't get home. And Peru's on lockdown, and we're on lockdown, and the immigration service is really complicated right now. And can you help get my kid home? And turns out we got a skillful team of people who helped helped repatriate his son back from Peru. And then sometimes it also goes into the policy side of things. And you can go all the way back to the beginning of this pandemic. Even before we had a case diagnosed in the state of Washington, I think I may have shared with you, we were talking to employers here in our region in Mason County. We talked to shellfish growers who said, hey, this coronavirus is going to be a thing because we grow gooey duck. There's not really a domestic market for it. We want to ship it to China. All of the ports we ship into are shut down. So they were already feeling economic pain, and which is why in literally the very first coronavirus response bill, you saw the economic injury disaster loans expanded, put more money into that program, but also allowed, for the first time in American history, that program to be used in response to a pandemic. And that literally came from me talking to shellfish growers in Mason County and to a mill down in Grace Harbor who said, our exports are in the tank right now.
Wow.
And then I'll give you one other quick example. We were talking to some folks, as you know, our healthcare providers have not been able to provide any sort of elective procedures as we've been going through this pandemic. So if someone needs to have their knee scoped or, any sort of optional procedure, they're kind of hosed right now. That's particularly problematic when some people use FSAs to save for those sorts of procedures, to be able to cover the copays or cover costs that may not be covered by their insurance. And those accounts have a expiration date. Those dollars that you put into an FSA or an HSA, those expire at the end of the year. Well, we've now gone through a 2-month period where people haven't been able to use that money for the most part. So literally I talked to a constituent who said, hey, this doesn't seem fair to me. And I said, boy, you're right. That's a really good point. So we wrote a bill, and it's a bipartisan bill that says, let's just provide an extra year. Let's just push out the expiration date a year for people for their savings accounts for medical procedures, so that they can use it. If they can't use it this year, they don't lose it. And interestingly enough, that bill was included in the HEROES Act, the most recent coronavirus response bill, that the House has passed. So those are just a few of the things where when we hear from constituents, and literally, Jeff, I'm on the phone. Yesterday, I was on the phone 14 hours between telephone calls and video conferences with our constituents who are just trying to get through what is a really, really difficult time. And part of my role and part of the role of my office is to make sure we have their back. And so that, if you're in fear of getting evicted for something that's not your fault through this coronavirus, that we have your back. If you're a school teacher, I mean, hell, we talked to folks down in Aberdeen who got pink slipped because of this. So one of the things we've been working on is how do we make sure that teachers can continue to teach and students can continue to learn? Those are things that we've been working on. You and I have talked before about things like access to broadband, really important right now, because what we've learned is this isn't just about whether you can watch Tiger King on Netflix. This is, if my kid's school got closed, can they continue learning? And if my Main Street business is shut down, can I continue to operate virtually?
If you have the need, Representative Congressman Kilmer is available for your help at kilmer.house.gov. There's a lot of great resources on his website there with links to the office locations as well. Derek, it was good to see you on here, and it was really good to catch up with you on all of this. Let's think about another couple weeks down the line, and we'll do this again.
I'd love it. Thanks, and everybody stay safe.
Thanks. It's good to see you, and thank you for all you doing.
Thanks. Take care, Jeff.